Hi there, this is Steven Gonzalez with Steven Gonzalez Voiceovers. How are you doing today? If I don't know where things are in a DAW, then it can become a really frustrating experience very, very quickly. And so to alleviate this, I'm going to introduce you to the major parts of Reaper. And that's what's next on Reaper for Voice Talent. In this video, we're going to be looking at the major parts of Reaper, starting from the top and going all the way down. And then we're going to be looking along the way at what Dockers are, their advantages, their purposes, all this good stuff. And then also we're going to be looking at the Reaper Theme Adjuster. This is something that's new with version 6, and it can be a very, very powerful friend or an extremely powerful enemy, depending on how it's used. And with that, without further ado, let's get started. Here we have a project within Reaper. At the very top, we have what's known as the menu bar. This is that ubiquitous menu bar that Mac always has, depending on the application. What's different about Reaper? As you can see, we have all these nice menus here. If you don't like the menu, you can throw it away and start from scratch. There are certain things within Reaper that are configurable, and there are certain things that are extremely configurable, and then there are certain things that are completely configurable. The menu system is one of those completely configurable things. Now, with version 6, they did clean up the organization a great deal, but still some people may want their own type of menu system. Well, it can be done. And in a course video, I'll show you how that's done. To the right of the menu, we have what I'm calling the interface information button. Here we have the sample rate, 48 kilohertz. We have the bit depth, 24. The format, which is wave. We have 2 in and 2 out channels. We have 1024 samples per block. And then we have this thing called latency. It takes time for the signal to get through the microphone to the interface, and then from the interface to the computer, then from the computer back to the interface, and then from the interface to the cans. What those two numbers here are saying is the delay that it's estimating from the interface to the computer, which is 24, and then again the return, which is from the computer to the interface, again 24 milliseconds. This is going to come into play when we discuss about record arming our track, which is going to happen in this video. It's something called monitoring echo. It is one of the most interesting experiences that you'll ever have as a voice talent. Trust me, it's amazing. Beneath the menu bar, we have the title bar, and the title bar has the title of the project, whether it's modified or not. If it's saved and there have been no modifications since the last save, then this disappears. Then we have, of course, Reaper, version number, and the architecture type should be 64, should not be 32, and then the license level. Beneath the title bar, to the left, this is going to be probably your best friend. If you're doing something repetitively within the same project, or you're doing the same thing from one project to another, then that action might be a good candidate to place in the Icon Toolbar, which is what this is. I say the Icon Toolbar, but if we pull up the Toolbar's context menu and we go to Switch Toolbar, we see that it's actually one of 17. I've seen some Reaper users, both voice talent and musical people, do each toolbar at each phase of the creative process. For example, in the voice talent realm, we could have toolbar 1 all about recording. Then we can have toolbar 2 all about editing. And then toolbar 3 would be all about processing. Toolbar 4 could be all about rendering and delivery. Beneath the Icon Toolbar, we have what's known as the TCP or the Track Control Panel. You're going to hear Reaper users say TCP and MCP all the time. The MCP is the Mixer Control Panel, and we're going to be getting into that in just a few minutes. It's sort of the cousin of the TCP. With version 6, we have something called a theme adjuster, and that's going to come into play later on in this video. Now, the track control panel contains the track controls. And this track control, you can see, has the record arm button, the label, the volume, the effects for playback, whether it's bypassed or not, the envelope automation button, engagement, whatever you want to call it. This is the volume indicator. In other words, how much higher or lower is this volume knob being turned? Then we have the panning, which kind of interests me because you don't see a pan button anywhere. This is just a reminder, hey, I'm still in the center here. For voice talent, this should almost always be in center. Now, if you're doing podcasts or something like that where you want panning, then we can talk about panning later. And then we have this blank space here. There's some hidden things there, which we're going to get to in just a second. We have the mute, we have soloing, and we have phasing. As voice talent, you'll probably never use it. To the right of the icon toolbar and the TCP, starting from the top here, we have the region lane or the region row, and it contains regions, which is what this is. A region is an object that indicates a time frame, and in a later video, I'll explain much more in-depthly what a region does and how we can use it in voice projects. Beneath the region lane, we have the marker lane, and again, you guessed it, it contains markers. Instead of a time frame, markers indicate an instantaneous point in time. I use markers in regions all the time. In another video, I'll show you how markers work. Beneath the markers lane, we have what's known as the timeline or the ruler. Yours actually might look like this. Remember, Reaper's meant primarily as a music production software package, but that doesn't say that it can't be VO-friendly. And what I did to change the units here, I pulled up the timeline's context menu, and at the bottom of the menu, we have units. And I can just say minutes and seconds, and there we are. Much more user-friendly for voice talent. Within the timeline, we have two things that are very, very important. The first one, this upside-down triangle with a vertical line underneath, this is the cursor. It can be one of three cursors, actually. It can be, as it stands right now, the edit cursor, or it can be a record cursor if you're in record mode, or it could be the playback cursor, which would be without the upside-down triangle if you are in playback mode. Also, we see that there is this kind of triangle pointing to the northwest and then another triangle pointing to the northeast, and then you have this barrier in between and it's shaded underneath. This is what's known as a time selection. Without time selections, it would be extremely much more difficult to work in any kind of DAW. What time selections in Reaper allows you to do is things like auto punch, where whenever you hit record, it won't record unless it's in the time selection. And then once it leaves the time selection, it goes back to playback mode. Generating regions. That's how I generated this region. I said, I want a time selection here. I hit a certain keystroke and it generated a region. Beneath the timeline, we have where you're going to be spending the majority of your time. This is what's known as the arrange area. Inside the arrange area, you're going to have things like envelopes and all this good stuff, but you're also going to have this. This is what's known as a media item. A media item is a very, very important part of Reaper. This is what allows Reaper to be what's known as a non-destructive DAW or non-destructive editor. You'll note that above this media item, you have a file name for a WAV file. This isn't actually the WAV file itself. It's a representation of a WAV file. Think of maybe your house and the living room, let's say, is in the corner of your house. You have a window in the front and you have a window on the side. And you look through the front window and you see your sofa, let's say. And then you go around to the side of the house, you look through that window and you still see the same sofa, but it looks differently because it's a different point of view. That's what media items do. The only time that Reaper actually touches a WAV file is in one of four things: either recording, gluing, freezing, or something called stemming. Those are the only times that Reaper actually touches the wave when it's generating those waves. Other than that, the media item is what Reaper uses. And here's what I'm talking about. I'm going to do what's called a split. And now I've turned this one media item into two. I separate this. In a destructive DAW, what I've just done is introduced a bit of silence in the WAV file itself. But if I untrim, what's called an untrim, you'll see that the original audio is here. It's not taken away, it's just hidden. This is the purpose of media items, and this is what it means to be non-destructive. Beneath the TCP and beneath the arrange area, we have what's known as the transport bar. The transport bar contains the ubiquitous transport controls that all DAWs have: play and record, stop, pause, loop, left and right, all this good stuff. To the right of the transport controls, we have the play cursor position. It's usually of the same units as the timeline. And then to the right of the cursor locator, we have what's known as the Reaper status. What is going on in Reaper right here and now? It's stopped right now, but it could be in recording mode. It could be playing back. It could be in pre-roll, whatever it happens to be. This is what's happening in Reaper right now. To the right of the status, we have the selection area. We have the start of selection. We have the end of selection. We have the length of selection. To the right of the selection area, we have two parameters which will be very, very useful in punch and roll: the project tempo and the project time signature. Now, BPM stands for beats per minute. Right now, it's set to 120, which means, of course, 120 beats per minute or 2 beats per second. 4/4 says there are 4 beats in a measure. So therefore, given that the BPM is 120, a single measure is going to be worth 2 seconds. We're going to be making some adjustments, some tweaking to those numbers in the very next video, so that measures equals 1 second. To the right of this, I really have never used the automation global override, so we'll bypass it. To the thing that can cause extreme confusion. If for some reason you're playing back and all of a sudden you sound like you're on helium and talking really fast, or if you start sounding like that, that type of thing, generally you need to look at your playback rate control, which is what this is. If it's sounding like you're on helium, it's probably greater than 1.0 as it is now. If you're talking really slowly and that kind of low kind of thing, then it's probably less than 1.0. Luckily, all you have to do is double-click on this knob and it'll go back to 1.0. Beneath the transport bar, we have a Docker. Now, I know it looks like a mixer, but it's actually a Docker, and I can tell that because of this tab right here. Now, what exactly is a Docker? Well, a Docker can allow you to do one of two things. It can either allow you to position certain functions on the screen in certain positions, or it can allow you to sort of have two functions share the same amount of real estate on the screen. And here's what I mean. Let's say that I don't want the mixer here on the bottom, that I want it on the right side of the screen. Well, I take the tab and I drag it, and you'll see this rectangle. Watch what happens with this rectangle as we approach the right side of the screen. It snaps and elongates, you see? It spreads out throughout the entire height of the screen. And whenever I let go of it, there's the mixer. And I can do things like adjusting the width of the Docker and therefore adjusting the mixer inside of it. Now, let's say that I don't want the mixer here, that I actually want the mixer on top. Well, I can drag the tab again on top, and again, it snaps and it spans the entire width of the screen, as you can see here. When I release, the mixer is there. That is the first definition of Docker, where you can position certain functions on certain parts of the screen. But you'll note something here. There's so much wasted real estate here. Maybe we can put something else that we use all the time here, like the effects browser, let's say. So we go to View, and we go to Effects Browser, or Shift F, and we're greeted with the effects browser. I can come down here and I can say Dock Effects Browser in Docker, and now it's sharing the same real estate as the mixer, height notwithstanding. But you can always adjust this, you see? And now it won't scoot like it did before. But there's still so much wasted real estate here. We're going to be solving that in just a few moments. Let's put a third function, the video window, in this Docker. So we go to View, and we go to Video. And again, it's this floating window, and we pull up its context menu and say Dock. And now the mixer, the video, and the effects browser are all in one Docker. You may have noticed I did something just now. I just dragged the video tab when it was in the middle. I dragged it over to the right. That's how you can adjust the order of the tabs. You just take the tab and you drag it over whichever way you want to go. See that? Let's get to ordering things. Let's say that we want the effects browser in the middle. We want the video on the side over here. Well, we first take the effects browser and we drag it to the upper right-hand corner. And unlike last time, which the indicator, the location indicator, spanned the entire width of the screen, you'll note now it only spans half of the screen. When we release, The effects browser is now to the right of the mixer and video tabs. Now let's take the video and do the same thing. Drag it up to the upper right-hand corner. You'll note that the indicator doesn't even span halfway. That's because we're not going to be going halfway with it. And when we release, there we are. The 3 Dockers are in line. And this is what I'm talking about, positioning and sharing real estate and all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and get rid of all of these Dockers here and put the Docker back down here. And now let's talk about what's inside this Docker, the Mixer Control Panel, or the MCP. Before version 6, the MCP was quite literally the mirror counterpart of the TCP. And it still is to a certain extent. For example, if I hit the mute button here on the MCP, well, it's indicated in the TCP. Now, if I unmute in the TCP and I solo, well, whenever I get back down to the MCP, you see that it's there. This actually breaks whenever it comes to this route button. You'll note there is no route button in the TC. This has to do with what's known as the theme adjuster. And that's where we're going next. We can go to Options, Themes, and Theme Adjuster Color Controls. And we're greeted with this thing that could be either your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on how it gets out of your control. This is what's known as the theme adjuster. So let's say, for example, that some people's eyes are still sensitive, even though it's muted colors. The eyes are still sensitive. Maybe we like working in the dark or whatever, and we like darker themes. Well, we can take this gamma slider and we can slide it all the way down and notice what happened to the theme now. It's dark, dark, dark. Now, if we ever want to come back to this line here, we can just simply double click on the fader and there it is. And you can knock yourself out. You can do some very unfortunate things like that, for example, and we can double click and bring it all back. Let's hit this arrow here and go to the Track Control Panel Adjuster. And this is what I was talking about earlier. You'll see that there's a bunch of real estate here that's got some hidden stuff, and here it is. You can see it. And this is what I'm talking about as far as the route button being here in the MCP, but not in the TCP, because the theme adjuster says if the mixer is visible, hide the routing button in the TCP. We click on hide to unhide. It's a toggle. And now you see the route button in the TC right there. Now you'll note that the effects button and the automation button moved out of the way so that the route button could take its place. Now, whenever we hide it, everything adjusts back to where it was. And same thing with pan and width. If I want the pan knob, there it is. If I don't want it, I can always hide it. To be honest, unless you're a podcaster, I would keep it hidden because we don't need pan and width. If the track is not selected, hide labels and values. What does that mean? Note here, this indicates where this volume knob is located, and center is where the pan is at the time. So if I unselect, you'll note they disappear. That's because if track is not selected, which it is not now, then hide those values. If I select it again, they appear again. If the track is not armed, hide all kinds of stuff. But if it is armed, don't hide it. I'm going to introduce you to something that is going to knock your socks off, and I'm being very sarcastic here when I say that. It's what's known as monitoring echo. Starting with version 6, Kakos has monitoring on by default when a track is being record armed. And what happens is this latency that I spoke about earlier, the 24 milliseconds, is going to come into play whenever we hit this record arm button. We're going to see a VU meter along with a peaks indicator here. We're going to also see the record mode. We're going to see the input, where it's getting its stuff from, in other words. And then also we're going to be looking at the record mode, the input, where it's getting the input from, all this good stuff. Okay, let's experience this monitoring echo in 3, 2, 1. Now, how you like this? This is monitoring echo. Okay, basically what's happened, if you see, you have the input, which you can always change it. And then we have the in effects here. This is basically what we would call outboard effects. In other words, whenever you're recording something, what's applied to the audio before it gets put into a media item. and you can't take it out. Don't even worry about it. Normally, this is empty. And then we have the monitoring here. What is it monitoring? And then we have the monitoring mode, if you will. Let me uncheck the record arm now, and sanity ensues again. We're going to be experiencing monitoring echo again when we get to recording. Now let's go to the mixer control panel, and again, it's analogous to the TCP. You can do certain things if the track is selected, if it's not, if the track is armed, if it's not, all kinds of border issues, that type of thing. You can do a different layout, you can do different sizes, that type of thing. Then we have the custom colors, knock yourself out because I'm going to keep it on Reaper 6. And it goes to envelopes, which we're going to be getting into in another course video. And then finally back to global settings. And speaking of global settings, that's actually going to be our next topic in the next video, when we talk about tweaking some areas within Reaper that'll make it even more VO-friendly. Now, the link to the Mac-centric playlist is in the description below. And if you found this video educational, if you enjoyed it, then click on that like button, subscribe to my channel, hit that notification bell, setting it to all, so that way whenever I go live or I upload a video, then you'll get a notification. And again, if you have any comments or questions, please put them in the comment section below. I'll try to get to them as soon as I can. This is Steven Gonzalez with Steven Gonzalez Voiceovers, wishing y'all all the best, and I'll see y'all in the next video.